Thank you, Christoph, and very much thanks to the Goethe-Institut for having us. This is an exciting theme, privacy and surveillance. We just had a conference up at the ARENDT Center on the same topic a couple weeks ago, about a month ago, and something both of us are quite interested in and happy to talk about. At the conference, I spoke a fair bit about Hannah Arendt and privacy. Many people think of Hannah Arendt as a thinker of the public sphere and of politics, which of course she is, but I think often ignored is that in almost every one of her books and many of her articles, the role of private life and the importance of a refuge from public life and the political importance of boundaries that separate public and private play an extraordinary role in her writing. She doesn't develop her thinking on privacy nearly as deeply at times as she does her world on the public world and politics. That said, she does develop it quite a bit, and in fact, I would make the argument there is not another major thinker in the canon of Western thought that's written more on privacy than Hannah Arendt. So I think she has a lot to say about it, and as this debate around privacy and surveillance has emerged, I've become more and more interested in thinking it through. At the conference, I invited Professor Mehta, Uday, to speak, and he gave a really spectacularly thoughtful talk on Gandhi and privacy. And as is often the case when Uday and I talk about Gandhi and Arendt, there were many points of intersection, but also some important differences. And we thought it might be interesting to have a conversation about privacy understood through Hannah Arendt and Gandhi. So that's what we're going to try and do. It's an experiment in some way. So let me begin by saying just very briefly one or two things about privacy as I understand it. And I'll start with this, that I think there is a great danger to privacy and private life today, and I think it matters. I take the danger to be not simply I take the danger to not be technological. And by that, what I mean is, I think that, am I doing something with this? Is it? It does seem like there's an echo, right? I think the danger comes from the desire, and the desire is to overcome our privacy. And let me say that there's three ways that I understand this basic desire. One is that privacy is inconvenient, so it would be the desire for convenience. I think we all understand this to some degree, but just imagine Dr. Cloud, which is what we currently have, but on steroids. We will, I think there's someone working on the app right now, right, Dr. Cloud, in which you will very soon have your blood pressure, your insulin levels, et cetera, regularly updated, sent to the cloud, analyzed, and reminded to take this medicine, take that medicine. And this will make your life much better, and eventually you may even put it on auto pay, just like I do my bills, and it will automatically inject your medicines when you need to. But the privacy implications of this are extraordinary, but most people will go down this road because of its convenience. That's the desire. The second is that privacy is dangerous, and thus security is a desire. We can talk about that. But the truth of the matter is that even after Edward Snowden's revelations, and even though the majority of Americans don't think the government should be listening and watching them, they do think the government should be listening and watching anyone who uses words like explosives or automatic weapons in their search engine queries. So 57% say it's unacceptable for the government to watch us, but 65% support watching people who do such things. And so the desire for privacy just diminishes. And then the third desire to get rid of privacy, is I guess the way I would like to put it, is democracy. In 1890, E.L. Gotkin, the founder of the nation, wrote, "In all democratic societies today, the public is disposed either to resent attempts at privacy, either of mind or body, or to turn them to ridicule." And I think that's just as true today. Privacy is seen as a mark of privilege. The elite have privacy, no one else does. Privacy is always a privilege for some and not usually granted to the many. And thus, democracy usually espouses transparency, not privacy. So if those are the dangers and the desires that lead us to get rid of privacy, I do think it's important to ask why it matters. I think one of the reasons we are losing our privacy today, one of the reasons that the argument in favor of privacy is being lost, and I don't think we should kid ourselves to think that it's not, is that it's very hard to articulate a meaningful ground for privacy. Most of the meaningful grounds for privacy that are given are things like dignity or autonomy. And yet, when people freely decide to give their information to the government or to Facebook, it's very hard to make arguments for dignity or autonomy that say they shouldn't be allowed to do that. Anita Allen, who's the provost at the University of Pennsylvania, leading privacy scholar, I think gets it right when she says that the only way to protect privacy is through paternalism. We have to, in a sense, legislatively decide that we have to take the decision about privacy out of individuals' hands. It's a bold argument, and I think it's worth considering. But we're never going to win. You're never going to keep privacy unless you decide that privacy actually does matter, and you make an argument for why it's important that people will respect. Why I think Hannah Arendt's important is I think she actually makes such an argument. The problem is, I think her argument is deeply controversial. In short, she argues that privacy is important for two reasons. One, for the protection of individual depth. She says, a life spent entirely in public in the presence of others becomes, as we would say, shallow. The point here is that if you're going to be a deep thinker, if you're going to be a deep and thoughtful person, you need secrets. Think about a novelist writing a novel who's never had a secret, who doesn't have lusts and fantasies and antisocial thoughts. How would we have fiction? How would we have art without a dark inner world that we don't let out? Now, people could say, well, why don't we just let it out and have pure transparency? And well, the answer is that we just live in a world that will never allow everything to be said, A, and B, I think such a world would be deeply shallow. That's the first side. I'm going to be very brief. We can bring it out more. The second argument for why privacy matters is not about the individual. It's about the public realm. If there is no privacy, if increasingly, as we all know, you can say anything, you can do anything in public, you lose the distinction of those things that should be in public and those things that should be hidden, as Hannah Arendt says. If you lose the sense that there are things that you should think in private and maybe tell your loved ones, but never share in public, we lose standards of decency, we lose standards of civility, we lose the very idea of public judgment, of judgments about what is true, what is good, what is right, what is wrong, and what is beautiful. And part of the loss of privacy today has to be traced to what my friend Rochelle Gerstein calls the repeal of reticence. Reticence is a value that I think many people today don't even understand or know what it means. But it's an unwillingness to share certain things because it's wrong to put them in public. And I think what Arendt understands is that if everything is made public, and thus there is no private, we lose the ability to have public standards, public judgments of taste, which is the essence of what public life is, making judgments of what is right and wrong, good and bad. And I just want to, I'm going to end here, but I'm going to read one quote, actually not by Hannah Arendt, although I wish it would have written by Hannah Arendt. It's written by the novelist Jonathan Franzen in his short story, Immortal Bedroom. My sense of privacy functions to keep the public out of the private and to keep the private out of the public. See, he turns it around, the private out of the public. This is the other reticence. A kind of mental border collie yelps in distress when I feel that the line between the two has been breached. This is why the violation of a public space is so similar as an experience to the violation of privacy. I walk past a man taking a leak on a sidewalk in broad daylight. And although the man with the yawning fly is ostensibly the one whose privacy is compromised by the leak, I'm the one who feels the impingement. Reticence, meanwhile, has become an obsolete virtue. With the repeal of reticence, we no longer can make these public judgments about what is right and wrong and what is belongs. And so that's, I think, the basis of the beginning of an Arendtian defense of why privacy matters. But it's controversial. It makes a claim that we should make public judgments. It's also controversial because what it says is we want people to have secrets, even secret lives that we find offensive. And I just should say, the essay in which Arendt most clearly develops her defense of privacy is her most reviled essay, and it's called Reflections on Little Rock. It's one in which, while she approves and supports the decision to end legalized segregation, she opposes the attempt for forced desegregation of the schools. And her argument is that if privacy is going to exist anywhere, it should exist in a parent's right to educate their children as they want. And that means including educating them in ways that are racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever. As long as they don't act wrong in public, in private, they should be allowed to be educated as their parents wish. She says this is what defends uniqueness and plurality in the world. So when I said I think there is an Arendtian justification for privacy, but it's controversial, these are what I mean by that. What impressed me so much about Uday's talk is that he really took the other very hard argument, which is to say that for Gandhi, just privacy didn't matter that much, and we should all not maybe worry so much about the coming loss of privacy. And I thought I'd let him talk a bit about Gandhi and privacy, and then we'll get this conversation going.
Yeah, so thank you, Roger. The way let me qualify what you just said about Gandhi.
Yeah.
It's not so much that privacy doesn't matter to him. I think it matters deeply to him. In fact, it matters so much to him that he would never allow privacy to be something that somebody else could secure for you. So it's not something that could be secured through a right that the government secures for you. So what I was trying to say at your conference in Bard was that in some sense, what one sees in somebody like Gandhi is a deep concern with privacy, but not with the right to privacy. Because he feels he believes that the moment you try and articulate your concern with privacy through the language of rights, then, and it is the state that is meant to stand guarantee for those rights. The moment you do that, then you're in a domain where the state can rightly say, look, but we have these other rights we have to also guarantee. We have to guarantee free speech. We have to, in this country, Fourth Amendment, all sorts of other rights.
Security.
Now, I think that one way to crystallize or to capture the way Gandhi thinks about privacy and many other things is the following. At some point in the modern West, and now just about everywhere, the concern with security, both at an individual level and at a collective level, became a kind of transcendent value. And what I mean by it became a transcendent value is that it didn't have the status of being just one among many values that individuals and societies treasure, but rather it became that value which in some sense was the ground through which other values, the balancing of other values, happened. So it wasn't just another value. It was a kind of regulative ideal. So, roughly speaking, I would say, to speak in a more philosophic voice, I think this happens, one sees this in something like the primacy that Thomas Hobbes gives to security, both individual security and collective security. So in his language, the value of self-preservation. Once security assumes this status of being a kind of transcendent value, then discussions of other rights, privacy versus equality, privacy versus something else, okay? Then one is in a domain where one has to balance these other rights, other values. And typically, so in constitutional language, one might say one has to balance First Amendment rights with Fourth Amendment rights against inappropriate forms of searches. So once security acquires this transcendent status or this special status, then privacy is just one of the things in the mix that needs to be balanced. And, one way where that balancing occurs is through the language of law or through courts. Another way, of course, it occurs is through the language of elections. You vote in a bunch of people who say, look, this group of people should have special scrutiny attached to them, Muslims, Jews, whoever you want, and your political system then, in some sense, follows. So once you have this concern with security, then a lot of politics is about balancing different rights. Now, the thing about Gandhi, I think, that's interesting is he's not concerned with security. He just is not concerned with security. He's not concerned with individual security, he's not concerned with collective security. So he doesn't think it's the state's job to supply security, in part because he doesn't think it's the state's job to care that much about boundaries and borders. That's not the sort of nationalist he is. He isn't a nationalist to start with, but in any case, he's not concerned with security as a high value at all. And he's similarly not concerned with it at an individual level. Okay? So he doesn't think sacrificing one's life or asking people to sacrifice their lives for certain things that they hold to be very important is wrong. Indeed, he thinks that's precisely the kind of action where ethics and politics meet that he celebrates. But the point I'm leading up to is that once you don't think that security is a transcendent value, and you have a whole different set of things which you think are transcendent values, but in any case, once you don't think security is a transcendent value, then the concern with privacy can in fact be much, much more robust. Because now privacy is no longer something you have to balance off with something else. It can actually be something you value. So, but you don't value it because you have a right to it. You just value it. But it also means, and so that's to kind of give a certain kind of conceptual framework to the way Gandhi thinks about privacy, which is, I think, it matters a lot to him, but it matters in a way that can't be thought of in straightforward terms of the right to privacy. And the second thing is, there are certain forms of privacy that matter to him, and there are other forms of privacy that we would think fall within the domain of privacy, but that don't matter to him at all. So he says, look, there's no reason why anybody should have to knock before entering my bedroom. I often sleep absolutely naked with these two young nieces of mine. I don't mind if you see that. That's not the domain of privacy that I value. I'm completely transparent about it. For the same reason, or for a similar sort of reasons, he thinks states shouldn't have secrets. They just should not have secrets. This, I think, is linked to his concern with not caring about security. But you might say, well, if he doesn't value this form of intimacy, he doesn't think of this form of intimacy as private, or what the hell does he think of as private? Yeah, it seems like a perfectly good question. I mean, if he doesn't mind people walking in his bedroom, well, what does he? So here's an example of something that he does think is very private. But as you will see from the example, it's not something that you could easily infringe on, and it's not something that the state could protect. So he says in the beginning of his autobiography, he says, there are some things that are so important to me that it's only between me and my God. They're so important that they're matters that relate only to me and my God. And then he says, this nobody can communicate about. So here's a domain of privacy or what one could call privacy. He says, it's so important to me. It matters deeply to me. And I can't even communicate to you about it. And presumably the state can't do a damn thing about it. The state can't infringe on it. So, just by way of conclusion, I mean, one of the many things I've learned from Roger, or one of the many things I've learned from Roger in restudying through his eyes Hannah Arendt, is the value Arendt places on privacy and the fact that privacy is something that is valuable because, as Roger said, it captures depth. It captures the possibility of having an inner life. It seems to me Gandhi deeply believed in that inner life. Gandhi deeply valued that depth. And I would say he valued it so much that he would not want that thing protected by something for which he had considerably less value, namely the state. I'll stop there.
That's really very helpful, Uday. Thank you. So I want to. You set up maybe a dichotomy here that I want to try and go down the middle of and ask you about. So on the one hand, you said that for Gandhi, he doesn't think it a matter of privacy that matters, that you knock on his door or that you know that he sleeps with his nieces naked, right? And on the other hand, you think that privacy is one's relationship with God or maybe one's personal thoughts, okay?
Yeah.
But what about in the middle,
Yeah.
right? And so I want to give 4 examples that Arendt says have to be in the private and get ruined if they're put into the public, that I think are in the middle of those, and I'd love to hear what you think Gandhi might say about those. One is goodness. She says goodness can't exist in the public sphere. It can only exist in the private sphere. Because if people know about your goodness, it dies. It's no longer goodness. Same with love, by the way. Goodness and love would fit there. Friendship can be public, but love can only be private. The other is birth and death. She says that where one is born and where one comes from, and by birth, I think she means birth through childhood, which she has a somewhat expansive definition of, is that when you enter the public sphere as a person, as a citizen, we shouldn't ask after your history. We should treat you as a citizen. You should come through largely as someone, and to demean you as, oh, you were born X, or your parents were Y, or you come from Z, is an ad hominem attack of some sort. And A, and B.
So birth and death should not be
in the public. And we have this, of course, our society, we love these books about death and how we die. It's become one of the most public things we talk about, blogs and everything. And now people are putting their births online. There's a very interesting article, for those of you who are interested, in The Point magazine about 6 months ago by a woman named Dawn Helpland Herrera. And she says that she's a grad student at the University of Chicago, and she'd always been critical of Hannah Arendt's distinction between public and private on feminist grounds. And then she gave birth. And she screamed and shrieked and whatever. And she thought a lot about how this was not something she wanted someone to have seen. And she thought that this taught her a bit about what Arendt meant by privacy, that your urges and desires have to be kept in private. And then the third is what I mentioned earlier, this idea of opinion, right? That I should be able to talk to you as my friend or my family and say things that I maybe believe or maybe don't believe, whether joking or not, but know that they are inappropriate. But in a sense, try them out And I think the example I'd like to at least put on the table in this regard is someone named Donald Sterling, who some of you may remember. He was a basketball owner of
that guy,
of the LA Clippers.
Yeah.
And he was an elderly gentleman, white, and was dating a biracial younger woman. And she took some pictures with Magic Johnson and other people and put them on social media. And he called her up and said, look, could you please not do that in the future? And she tapes the conversation and she says, why don't you want me to do that? And he says, because my friends don't like it. And she's like, what do you have against it? And he's like, I got nothing against it. You can bring them home, you can have them to dinner, you can sleep with them for all I care, but don't put it on public media. My friends don't want that on public media, et cetera. We might find,
That being
her hanging out with black
black
people.
guys. Yeah,
and she's like, I'm black. What do you? He's, well, no, they don't think of you as black.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
okay. We can think of him as reprehensible,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But the point is that this is an intimate conversation, and we can, and I worry about whether people should be sharing intimate conversations with their intimates.
Yeah.
But more importantly, what does it do to us all when we worry that our intimate conversations are no longer intimate?
Yeah.
How can we talk and develop opinions and think things through if there is no private, intimate realm left? So these are 3 or 4 different ideas of privacy that ARENDT says are very important, right? I'm just wondering, they're not sleeping with my nieces naked and they're not God. And I'm wondering how you might think Gandhi would address or think about these kind of questions.
It's a really difficult question. I mean, let me just think aloud. On the one hand, Gandhi is loath to give things, do things, and then, as it were, give them a cover of darkness. So, his default is, if I'm talking to you in private, it should be no different than if 1,000 people are overhearing.
Do you agree with that?
I don't agree with that, okay? Yeah. But that may just say that I don't have the radicalism of a Gandhi. Okay? There are aspects of it that trouble me a lot about that, but there are also aspects of it that I feel suggest that Gandhi actually had a very different vision. Mm-hmm. And it's a radically different vision, and we should reject the vision, okay? But it's not as, and sometimes we think, we can embrace Gandhi because there seem to be so many parts of his vision that just are really lovely, We like a guy who doesn't want to have violence and stuff like that. He seems, almost cuddly at points. He's not. He's just not cuddly, okay? There is something, but what I find interesting about him is that there is this different vision. And so one of the things, let's say, that makes Gandhi appealing in that he doesn't believe in secret councils, on things being shielded from. So as a result of that, he never falls for the trap of a Leninist cadre. Mm-hmm. So he never falls for that. What Gandhi says in the most important elevated meetings with the Viceroy or with his fellow comrades in the Congress Party in India It's what he would say if 10,000 people were listening. And so he never develops so many of the kind of pernicious aspects of vanguardism. Yeah? That's a good side, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay? But nor is Gandhi, I think, and this is where, I'm just too much of a kind of run-of-the-mill, liberal, modern, or whatever it is, so it makes me uncomfortable. Gandhi doesn't believe in so many of these aspects of privacy. He doesn't think, or let me put it this way, the aspects of ourself which ARENDT wants to cultivate or to create ground for the cultivation. We were talking earlier about mushrooms that need to grow in the dark. So the Arendtian view that we are all a bit like mushrooms. We need some dark spaces to grow in.
That's what she says.
That's what she says. I think Gandhi is not interested in that side of the self. He thinks, look, the more interesting part of the self.
But she thinks that for children. Would he have a similar view about children?
I don't know.
He grew up a very protected child, I assume.
Yeah, the guy is such a weird guy. We don't know, he just took off. It's true that he has a real facility with kids, but that's. But look, the point I'm trying to make is, I think for Gandhi, ultimately, what you're trying to cultivate is an aspect of the self for which the right to privacy is completely accidental. It doesn't matter.
So I would say,
and that aspect of the self, I think, really can't be elaborated for Gandhi without the language of religion.
Yeah. I don't want to hold on to the right to privacy per se. That's not something Arendt ever talks about, as far as I know. But one thing I do think is that, very much like Gandhi, Arendt was someone who took great risks and always spoke her mind in public.
Yeah.
And paid great prices for it, obviously. But her view was that one would never develop the self that had the capacity to do that if you don't have places you can retreat to, grow up in, etc. And I'm just wondering to what extent Gandhi would really disagree with that.
He wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah.
He wouldn't disagree with that, okay? I don't think he'd disagree with that at all. Except, I'm not sure he would call those spaces private.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of Bildung for him can happen in a cafe, it can happen in an ashram, it can happen at home. So I'm not sure that's private for him.
Okay.
But just coming back to the question you asked, which I thought, look, there's another sense in which Gandhi is scrupulously liberal, or one might think of him as scrupulously liberal. If, for instance, there are cases where somebody says to him, look, I'm saying this to you in confidence. So typically when somebody says to Gandhi, I'm saying this to you in confidence, Gandhi will say, I'd rather you not say it in confidence. But if, as was often the case, people would insist, no, it is being said in confidence, then Gandhi would, then he was absolutely scrupulous in not revealing that. Okay. So it's not as though his commitment to openness led him then to also violate confidences. So, he's absolutely insistent. He'll say in public, I can't tell you what the guy said. It was said in confidence. And people will say to him, what the hell, what do you mean it was said in confidence? You don't believe in that kind of stuff. He says, yes, I do. I tried not to agree to it, but the guy insisted. Now I'm bound by it. So there is a kind of, it's not as though the concern with transparency is one which trumps everything. He's actually, I think it's also one of the reasons why the British trust him. They see in him somebody who's playing a very straight game.
Yeah. I have one last question and a comment, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. And that is, I said earlier, just a moment ago, that Arendt really never defends, as far as I remember, a right to privacy. Yeah. The one thing she says in this regard is that if privacy matters, which she thinks it does, the only reliable safeguard for privacy that political systems in history have ever discovered is the right to private property.
Yeah.
And what she says is, private property may not be defensible on economic grounds, but it is on privacy grounds.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that was something that would mean anything to Gandhi.
Yeah, again, I think on this, Gandhi is a kind of interesting I think for Gandhi, in an odd way, private property matters, but it doesn't matter a whole hell of a lot. So it doesn't have the sort of kind of special significance that private property has had, as in ARENDT or in somebody like Hegel. Private property becomes the thing through which you can express a free will. Yeah. That's a big deal. I think for Gandhi, private property is a bit like possessions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're important, but you can do without them too. It's a kind of almost cavalier attitude. So I think people have made this attempt that, Gandhi was protected by big industrialists, or he was financed by big capital, etc. And all of that is true. And yet I would say, I don't think it mattered that much to Gandhi. I think on the private property issue, the thing is, in some sense, Gandhi is also a lawyer. The law matters to him a lot. So he will often say, look, but there is private property. The law sanctions it. You can't just take away people's property. If you're going to take it away, you've got to do other things before you take it away. Yeah. You can't just go around. So he'll say to a lot of the protesters, you just can't go around beating up people. You can't go around smashing property. You can't go around breaking the governor's mansion. However just your cause.
But there's no real need that he sees to do something affirmative to protect privacy.
No.
I'm going to, I hope we've put some things on the table. I don't know how we do questions. Is there a microphone, or do we?
Yes, there's a microphone.
Do you want to take questions, Christoph, or do you want me to?
Okay, here's the microphone.
Sir, do you want to do questions, or do you want me to? Do you want to pick stuff?
No, we will take questions. So there's one over there.
I think the shoes before me.
Yeah.
Thank you. So actually, I'm glad you just touched on this at the end, because my question had to do with Gandhi's training as a lawyer. So how would you say that Gandhi's sort of Oxbridge training in British jurisprudence and then his subsequent work as a kind of activist lawyer in South Africa affected his later approach to privacy and just in general to thinking about the role of the state in protecting things?
I think his training as a lawyer matters in the sense that in many ways his activism is the activism of a lawyer. By that I mean, for instance, Gandhi will hardly ever make general demands. He'll make very specific demands. He'll say, by 4:30 next Thursday afternoon, you have to have done A, B, C, and D. Okay. He'll never say things like, leave the country. He starts talking like that very late in his life. Okay. He doesn't ask the British to leave India till very, very late in his career. Okay. He's always asking for something specific. So give us this, give us that, give us this, stop doing this, stop doing that. Okay. That, I think, is part of his training as a lawyer. It's a kind of concreteness. Regarding the state, I think there are two aspects to this. He's a realist. He sees the state is there. He acknowledges it. It has to be taken seriously. On the other hand, I think he also has a vision in which you could have the rich organization of human life without something like a centralized power. And that's what he associates with villages. I think the appeal of villages for him, a bit like the appeal of the township for Tocqueville, the New England township, is precisely that it's not connected to something central. Okay. It's on its own damn orbit. It settles things on its own terms. And as a mode of organization, it doesn't need to have the thing that is so crucial to the state, which is it doesn't need to be sovereign. There's no sovereignty in a village, he says time and time again. Okay? And that's what he likes about it. So I think, on the one hand, he acknowledges the state. He thinks it's a fact of life. On the other hand, he also can imagine, as very few of us can, a mode of existence in which the state doesn't exist.
Thanks for the dialogue, which many good ideas. On the risk of saying something that everybody knows, seems to know, because it goes through a couple of the talks of the panel discussion before, and now yours, and nobody mentioned her, is Helen Nissenbaum. And her concept as privacy, as contextual integrity. In the abstract, I read it, says, contextual integrity ties adequate protection for privacy to norms of specific context, demanding that information gathering and dissemination be appropriate to that context and obey the governing norms of distribution within it. 2004 Washington Law Review. So there is a concept that actually captures what you kind of said, and is about privacy in the information age, and what the other concept is. Just, it seemed everybody knew that, and nobody dared to speak it.
Yes, so first of all,
She's from here.
She's from NYU, yes. No, she's a leading privacy scholar, very important. Her books are, and she's had quite a bit of influence in helping to think through privacy law in the United States. It is a kind of balancing exercise, which Uday was saying that the Gandhian approach sort of tries to avoid or not recognize. And I think to a certain extent, Arendt is with Gandhi on that. I think for Arendt, there are simply spheres and acts, kinds of acts that simply are private and others that are public. And once you make the decision that one is in one, you don't balance it. And that's how she decides her thoughts on Little Rock, right? You can disagree with her and say education is not private, right? And that's, I think, the best critique of her work, if you want to make a critique of it. But her claim is, she doesn't think of it as education, she thinks of it as how you raise your children.
Yeah.
And she says, if that's not private, what is? And in the same essay, by the way, she defends, she says that it should be not only that it should be illegal to prevent people from having interracial marriages, because that's a private act and you should be able to marry anyone you want. So her view on this is not necessarily left or right or progressive or not progressive. It simply says there are private spheres and public spheres, and yes, sometimes these things are hard to figure out, but you have to figure them out and protect them. I think in this way, both Arendt and Gandhi, in different ways, resist what I would call the modern legal approach to thinking about privacy, which is trying to balance these things out, which I understand, and I understand that's where we're at. I think in trying to bring Arendt and Gandhi into this conversation, I don't think per se we're trying to say they're going to be argued in the court of law, but that they help us think through what's going on. I mean, the larger context in the way I presented it is, I think in the end, the balancing approach will end up with almost all privacy disappearing, because over and over again, what people choose is convenience, security, and democracy, transparency over privacy. And I think the trend is not simply technology, although technology, I think, accelerates it. But the argument I'm making is that if you don't take one of these fundamental approaches of either someone like Gandhi or someone like Arendt, and I'm sure there's others as well, the net result will be that we'll just simply lose privacy.
Companies balance.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, there's a question of who's balancing, but I don't think I think that's not entirely fair. I mean, I think the truth of the matter is, you and I are as complicit as Facebook and Google and The Circle from David Egger's novel. The reason these companies are successful is because people freely give up their privacy to them. And people freely allow the government to spy on them because they want security and safety. And I guess I'm just not very confident that privacy will last if we don't think of non-balancing, non-autonomy-based or dignity-based reasons for privacy. That's what I'm trying to suggest. And I think the entire conversation about privacy as it's being going on right now is about autonomy, dignity, whatever. And I think the answer is people don't think losing privacy takes away their autonomy or takes away their dignity. They keep giving it up. And unless you're willing to accept that, you're not going to ever have an honest conversation about privacy.
I agree. I completely agree. I also think, by the way, I think you're right that somebody like Gandhi I think would have taken many of the positions of the Little Rock essay, of Arendt's Little Rock essay. I don't think Gandhi would have thought mandating or legislating integration, desegregation, with something like schooling. I think he would have been opposed to it, precisely because I think he also would have said, look, this is something that the family or the society should be handling. It's got nothing to do with the state. Yeah. And of course, that's a distinction that can be slippery, when there's we know it to be slippery, but I think for Gandhi it was something like education was very much part of the social sphere, and the social sphere was itself something that was defined by, religion above all else, by the family, and in that sphere, I think he would have felt, legislation should be very circumspect, or limited. Yeah.
We'll take one more question. There was one in the back.
I wondered if you could comment about Gandhi's influence with the British and how that might have helped to foster the development of India into the significant country that it is today.
Wow.
Who do you want should answer that, Roger?
Pass.
Look, I think what one of the most important things Gandhi did for India vis-a-vis the British, and which may relate to India's significance, is, I think, Gandhi, more than any other figure in the struggle for national independence, was deeply committed to the idea that we should not think of the British as our enemies. And so it was essential to Gandhi that the struggle for national independence or the anti-imperial struggle not be thought of in political terms, not be thought of in Schmittian terms, as friend and enemy.
It was still political in the sense of political organization. It wasn't social, right?
I would say Gandhi didn't want it to be political. Okay, I've written on this, but that I think for him, the moment the struggle for independence became political, it worried him. That is, once it had this feel of we are struggling for having sovereign power, we constitute a nation with a distinct boundary, this is precisely the language that Gandhi didn't want. He wanted it to be a discussion between two civilizations. He happened to think the Indian civilization was superior to the modern Western one. But he wanted it to be that discussion, not a political dispute. But at any rate, it was essential, it was very important to Gandhi that Indians not think of the British as their enemies. And I think, and this was also important to Nehru, by the way, but for different reasons. And I think the legacy of that commitment, that somehow the birth of this nation was not going to be tied to the idea of having enemies. I like to think that that's perhaps had a non-trivial effect on whatever the hell India has become in a positive dimension.
All right. Thank you, Uday, very much.
you, Roger.
Thank you all for coming.